Congratulations, lucky audience member. At this point I haven't made anything for this channel in about a year, so you're here for the new dawn as I reintroduce Moth Eaten Reels. My little haven where I ramble about movies I've seen lately in a way that makes me feel cultured, part of a community, like I have smart things to say, and like I have a personality outside of the crippling depression. We're diving in at the deep end this time with 31 Days of Horror because it's something I tried out last year on Twitter. RIP, sort of, it's a zombie, but it meant that I was reviewing films with like 1 to 2 sentences and putting pretty pictures there. But I kind of want to prove to myself and to other concerned parties that I do have more to offer, so hello YouTube, let's go! Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and smash that bell button. So welcome to day one. We're starting off with the violent, drug-laced 80s fantasy land of Mandy from 2018, starring God's favourite child, Nick Cage. Let's chat about it. So I feel it's important to let you know as well that I went into this with no idea what the film was about. Like, absolutely no clue, nothing. I knew that it had Nick Cage. That was it. And I've got to be honest, I thought it was a vampire movie. Our opening is this really moody blue Twilight filter. The song going over the top, it's like sundown, dazzling days. So I'm focusing on this sundown thing and this Twilight filter, and also the fact that the font they use for the opening credits is red, and it feels like they have like little fangs. I feel like that's what it looks like. So vampires are very much on the mind. I was wrong. I was so very wrong. In summary, we start with this view of Nick Cage doing his job as a logman. He chopped the trees. He chopped the trees with chainsaw. And then after that opening with the moody song that I really liked, he goes home to his love, the eponymous Mandy. And they have like a really nice little setup in their little cabin in the woods. But alas, that idyllic bliss is shattered within about 40 minutes of the movie, just because some cultist happened to drive by and decided that he and Mandy belong together. But in a lot more of a creepy, possessive way. A lot less of a... Never mind. You know what, I was going to say a lot less of a kind of Twilight 50 Shades of Grey way, but you know what, they were wrong as well. But this one is very... This is a Jesus cultist guy, he's entitled, he's narcissistic, and he ruins their lives and causes Nick Cage to go on a murderous rampage. But I think one thing that I really liked about the murderous rampage was that then they really did build up a lot to show us how in love they were. I feel like it's a really well shot, intimate movie. Definitely it feels really refreshing to get to watch something where it doesn't feel like there were lots of heads involved making it something that it had to be to draw in a profit. I don't know, I'm just so jaded these days. I feel like I can sniff it a mile away when there's clearly been a bunch of ideas that have been scrapped or meddled with because someone was on the high end going, but this needs to make money. I thought it was really beautiful, and even when it was weird, I welcomed that. I think my biggest thing in summary is that maybe it could have been a little bit shorter. There was some pacing issues near the end for me, but we'll get to that. I really want to talk about how intimate and dreamy I found the opening, because I really think that that was just like such a strength there for me. I think it's one to kind of like be prepared in the sense that you are in a mindset where you just want to vibe with the film. There is very little dialogue. However, just makes me respect it more that one of the first bits of dialogue we get is a knock-knock joke. I love that for them. I think it establishes so much. I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. I think, honestly, the part where he walks in from this big long drive and we get this title screen The Shadow Mountains, 1983 AD. Something that also establishes really early on this, as I say, this kind of like fantasy feel where everything's very like sensory and dreamy in this really beautiful glittery blue curly style. It kind of reminded me of like a vintage ice cream parlor. I think it really helps kind of like set the tone and the sense of comfort and safety we get from these early scenes. I think it's really sweet. Like, I was hooked. I was so sold on them immediately. One of the first things that he does when he comes home is just to like admire what she's doing. He's like, what are you making? She's like, it's like a jungle temple thing. And he's just like, wow. But but not like a sarcastic wow, like just a genuine, like he's enraptured, he's enthralled, he loves it, and they're just so comfortable again together. And we get like one of my favorite scenes where, again, it's so early, but it's all part of just this psychedelic, really like soft, nice, sensory, dreamlike feeling where they're in the tent and they're just talking about their favorite planets. All of the lights are kind of playing across them like a nebula, like a kaleidoscope, reds and pinks and yellows. And she says her favourite planet is Jupiter because there's a storm there that's been raging for 1,000 years. Again, it feels very like epic, fancy, cosmic. One thing that I did then know early on was that the composer was the same composer who did Arrival. Jóhann Jóhannsson, who unfortunately this was his last film before he died. It was another thing though, when I learned it early on, it did give me these extra preconceived notions. I then thought, oh, is it going to be a cosmic horror? I had some really wild ideas early on from going in and just feeling the need to guess what kind of horror we might be in for. And there was such an interesting mood set during this love theme where actually it played it really, really solemn. It was still then like comforting, but just in this almost sad way. Another thing that it really hammered home for me was actually I would have really flippin' hated to see this in the cinema. It's so visually gorgeous. It's one of those things where you would think, well, why wouldn't you want to see it on the big screen with the best sound and the best visuals in front of you? No, I'd have hated it, I think, because it's very sensual and just sweet, and I was really, really sold on their love. The two of them do share a bond that is stronger for the struggles they've both shared in life, I think. When he wakes from a nightmare and he says to her, like, you know, sometimes I think about moving away from this place. I really then felt that when she says, no, this is our little home. It's like their little sanctuary. And she tells this story about how when she was a kid, her dad got annoyed by the noise of all the starlings around them, and so he came to her and her friends with a big pillowcase full of the starlings' babies, and that he made her friends take turns beating the pillowcase, and when it got to her turn she just ran away. This really then does kind of feed into this idea of her as like specifically like delicate in a way that I say, yeah, you can then definitely see that she is a bit of a lamb to the slaughter, potentially, if you're ready to pick up on that. There's stuff early on in these idyllic moments that their sanctuary is not going to last long. Again, going into it knowing nothing except it was a horror, I think that they did seed in things were not meant to last. Even, again, like straight in what is then the love theme, there is just a pull over it, and I think that when I was sat there thinking, is one of them going to die, I definitely didn't think that it was going to be Nick Cage. You get this thing with the actors sometimes, like, it's not a bad thing, but I got the impression that it wasn't going to be Nick Cage that was going to die. But I thought one of them's gonna die. Yeah, I really think if you're not sold on their relationship and the idea that they are two people struggling against a past darkness but have found sanctuary in each other and in their home in the woods. I think that that is probably going to make such a difference how you see the rest of the movie, because by the time the cultists enter into it, I think that then we actually also enter a bit of home invasion horror. So Children of the New Dawn is then the second titles card we get, and another one that had me going back to thinking, is this a vampire movie? Because again, kind of crescent moon logo, looking a little bit like Fanged, that deep red. But no, it's just more like 80s black metal. But it introduces these antagonists really as something actually threatening. I've seen more and more things with cults as the kind of main villainous force in horror movies recently, but I do feel like they can be very cartoonish in a way that I'm like, I don't actually see them as threatening. The thing that I really liked about this movie is your cult leader, Jeremiah Sand. I think that his breed of self-absorbed, I'm on a mission from God, I deserve the world, I did find that really convincingly icky. I really like the picture that this scene paints. I think that it does do a good job of kind of mimicking the positioning of certain religious paintings. There's something in that framing that is very like Messiah. But man looks like a Goblin King in a real sleaze bag kind of way. He's got all of these Christmas cracker rings on his fingers, the open shirt, and it's very skin crawling. I hate it so much, and I think that I said something earlier about how like maybe the film could be too long, but definitely all of the build-up is the best part for me. We see then this older woman again who is clearly like the main agent for getting Mandy. She goes into her place of work, says some weird stuff that ends in a creepy little "see you later," which has Mandy side-eyeing, but she's like, as you would, you know? She was just like, okay, what a strange old lady. I will continue reading my book. We also have these flippin' metal bikers that are summoned. I know what was going to happen when he comes out in a car just randomly after this scene where we've seen this older woman contacting Mandy at her work. And he whistles with some kind of little ocarina thing. And then these flippin' Cenobite likes come out on motorbikes. I'm sorry, if something's got lots of nails in it, it's either a pincushion or a Cenobite. I almost think they were underutilized. They definitely help out in the kind of, like, they invade their home. They mostly then stop them obviously being able to fight back, because Nick Cage is a logger, he chopped the trees. I think that he could take down any of the other weedy little cultists, because honestly, they just look like a village council, but nah. They had the help from their demon bikers from hell, so they had no chance. It's again another one of the really pinky red, high contrast scenes that just make me feel like, honestly, they'd look at home in a Lady Gaga music video. There's then this really interesting thing for me. I don't remember them actually taking drugs, but I'm pretty sure Mandy and, I keep calling him Nick Cage, the character's name is Red. I will be calling Nick Cage Red from henceforth, unless he has a particularly Nick Cage moment. Red and Mandy, I'm pretty sure, were taking some kind of hallucinogen at the start of the film. It's interesting, kind of, the point that the film brings up about their security and trust and vulnerability in taking hallucinogens together. But the cultists, they force Mandy on her own. There's this massive, like, exotic looking wasp. That's something they press to her neck to inject some kind of venom. Then we enter another really artsy sequence. But what I'm saying is interesting to me is just this contrast of this experience of being under the influence of hallucinogens with someone you trust, with someone you can be vulnerable with, and then the difference of being made to go under them, to be vulnerable, to be brainwashed. We enter then quite a flippin' disgusting scene of all the cultists are just lounging around on the sofas. He's got this soundtrack on, and you know what? Bold move of him to put this woman under hallucinogens, thinking that it would make her vulnerable, that it would make her interested in him, or at least dozy enough to then just go along with anything he said. Because my girl has been wearing Black Sabbath t-shirts like all through this entire like start of the movie, and so when he puts on this really crap flipping song, all proud of himself, and she asks like, this song, it's about you, he's like, yes, it is. She just starts laughing at him. And at this point as well, he's like in flasher mode. She just starts getting this cackle that just increases as he starts then just furiously touching himself to try and stay hard because she's just laughing. His entire shallow ego just crumbled immediately. It's a really horrific scene because how could these basic people really be a threat if you really are not buying what they're selling? But I think at that point we've already seen that then they have got some otherworldly power backing them up. They've invaded their home. They're captive in their own home now. As Mandy laughs and laughs, her face starts to get quite scary. She's not just laughing, she's kind of screaming as well. She's so done for at that moment. And then the real movie begins. It's not funny, it's very serious. They burn her in front of Red. And honestly, I think, because that's the wild thing about Nick Cage, he plays things up so campy. For this, I think that it was actually played quite straight, lingering on the screams. I think that they actually must have put a lot of work into getting those screams right. And I will say, it's around here where I started to actually feel a little bit like it was getting a bit long. We don't get any kind of like deep, layered exposition about his backstory, but this is when the revenge part of the film starts, and he goes to an old friend, it seems, and he makes this really badass looking axe. It's like this big bloodborne looking scythe thing. It's like a scythe and an axe. A sax. His first targets are the demon bikers, and we get this final third title sequence that is then Mandy. Like, I would have posters of every single one of these title cards, even though it would be like the most bizarre thing to have around the house. I'm like, you don't understand. It's a constant bleeding effect that this title sequence has, to the point where Mandy starts to just tendril out and consume the screen entirely in Red. Unfortunately, Red doesn't get very far initially with taking down the Cenobites, not Cenobites. And yeah, as I say, this is kind of the area of the movie that actually I was a bit more turned off on these parts. I feel like the pacing got really strange. So the cultists were all together before, right? But for some reason, during this big old revenge part, they're all split up in a way that I was almost sat there expecting them to have then their own, if not title cards, then chapters going through. But then, as much as like the kills were quite cool, I was a big fan when he takes down the demon bikers after initially messing up taking down the demon bikers because he didn't use his cool scythe axe. He didn't use the sax, but he did then get to light them on fire and then light a cigarette of his own from the flames from their burning skulls. Definitely a couple of the deaths were then very satisfying. I just didn't like that they were so spaced out. I would have rather had one big massacre and then like final boss Jeremiah, you know? Another, not criticism per se, especially then at this end part, I don't always feel like the tone was then very well defined between horror and comedy. I definitely think it was supposed to be, like, funny to a degree. I mean, how can you light a cigarette off someone's burning skull and not call that, like, quite funny? I mean, that is some Looney Tunes nonsense, you know? Bugs Bunny would do that. Bugs Bunny would absolutely do that. But I think, again, I was just so affected by the early scenes and just the more grounded, real dread, with her story about the Starlings. And right at the very beginning, you see him refuse alcohol, and I think then, as part of that, when you see him go off the rails with just revenge, there's a sadness to that makes it quite chilling. But again, I think a lot of it was then trying to be very campy about it, which, you know, again, I like, but yeah, so some of that tonal cluster, I don't know, yeah. But the ending is sweet. The ending is sweet, I think. We get we get Nick Cage caging. He's got this blood-soaked face, just everything, his chin dripping with red, and so his flipping eyes are just like bursting out of his skull with this grin he has as he's in the car, and then sees Mandy next to him, and they have flashbacks to the night they met, and his face is clean, and then they drive off into the sky. Overall, I thought it was grand. Would 100% rewatch it. Would recommend it to those willing to actually feel immersed. And so, because I have a pretty insufferable memory for almost everything I don't log, I've logged this on Letterboxd as a 4 out of 5 stars, which my favourite review tubers will probably have a more distinct, unique rating name for that, but I'm just gonna say I thought it was really quite good. I liked it. Thank you for joining me for day 1 of 31 Days of Horror. I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.